Thank you for joining Leadership Rediscovered. I'm your host, Laura Siebold, and today I am so excited to be talking to Jim Estep, who is the president and CEO of the High Tech Foundation. Jim, thanks for being here today.
My pleasure.
I'm excited to have this conversation with you. I've heard your name so many times, seen it on so many things. You're very iconic in West Virginia and beyond. And I think you are involved in really great things that more people need to know about. So I'm excited to have you here and talk to you, and I appreciate you making the time for us. Yeah. So I usually like to start this podcast just by asking people to walk us through their leadership journey, their story. You can start that story wherever you want, but just kind of, for people who don't know you, maybe give us a little bit of flavor of who you are and what your background has been.
Sure. Well, I am from West Virginia. I born and raised here.
Wonderful.
Grew up in Braxton County. Go Eagles. I went to West Virginia Tech to get a Bachelor's of Science degree in computer science, and West Virginia University got a Master's in computer science. I also went through ROTC in college, so I spent several years in the U.S. Army Reserves, got an enormous amount of leadership training in that capacity, and certainly just all the years that I've been the CEO at the High Tech Foundation have certainly given me a lot of on-the-job training in leadership. So
yeah, for sure. So do you mind if I just kind of break down and double-click on a few things? So I'm so curious, just even where you started your career, what got you interested in computer science? Because I feel like that's a very popular major now, but I wonder if it was as popular when you went into it.
Well, that's a good question. I really can't say for sure. I just had an affinity towards computers, and you got to keep in mind this was in the 80s, so there weren't exactly advanced computer technology at that time. But there was just something about it that caught my attention. And in high school, we had a computer science class, which was very, very new for that time, for sure. And I took that class, and I took a second class, and I just said, this is what I got to be involved in. And so when it came time to choose what I was going to study in college, computer science for me was a no-brainer.
Wow.
And I love it. Still to this day, I love it. I'm not a practicing programmer anymore, but I love the field.
Yeah. Is there can you pinpoint what it is about it that you still love to this day? Because I think that's great that passion hasn't waned for you.
Well, I'm just fascinated by how computer technology can enable a person to do so much more, enable industry. And certainly today with artificial intelligence and potential of quantum computing, it is just so fascinating. It's almost existential for me, really.
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad that I can be doing something professionally in that area that has such an important, bigger purpose.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, when you started talking about having a class in high school, I always started thinking about the fact that how much technology has changed in a short period of time. I mean, I remember writing book reports on a typewriter. That seems like so ancient, but I did. I was typing things on a typewriter, and then eventually it became doing things on maybe one computer in a computer lab or in a computer classroom somewhere. I was an Oregon Trail child, so we played, that game, and just slowly the invention of having a computer in the home, that was a big deal, with, your floppy drives and all of that. And just fast forward, though, to even how students do work and how research is done now. I mean, again, I still think back to when we had to write book reports or research a topic. It was, you go to the library, you look at an encyclopedia, and it's just, even that alone has changed so much.
For sure. And certainly underlying that is the evolution of the internet.
Yes.
Which most people don't realize, but technically has been around since the early 70s, really 1969. And once that became more accessible, when the World Wide Web was introduced way back in the day, it really just, it was like throwing gas on a fire of computing.
Yeah.
And when I was young, the computational capabilities of computers was still growing. Mm-hmm. Storage technology was still evolving. But as time has went on and that computational power has increased, memory has become so cheap that it's just now been integrated in everything we do. Everything you can imagine it has computational technology involved.
Yeah. It's wild to think about, and I want to talk about the existential piece later. We'll put a pin on that one because I do want to talk about that. It's overwhelming at how fast things move. Yeah. But I want to hear from you as you think about, and we talked before even the cameras were rolling about your time in the Army, and one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about talking about leadership and doing this podcast is because I do feel like a lot of times leadership is a skill, but it's not necessarily taught or prioritized the same way other skills are. And so if you don't have the benefit of going through maybe a formal training program or some sort of resource put in front of you that teaches you how to be a leader, or maybe you just luck into having really good role models for leadership, sometimes it can be a harder journey for people to learn how to actually be a successful leader. So this is kind of a two-part question, but I'd love to hear generally just things that you have learned about leadership over time that have stuck out to you, and then even, if you have kind of a specific definition of leadership or how you like to think about leadership. I'd just love to get your perspective on that.
Absolutely. Well, I feel very, very fortunate to have been able to experience all of the training that I received, in my time with U.S. Army Reserves. Yeah. The military has an extensive, well-structured training program. So you're going to be taught leadership regardless of what skill set you have.
Yeah.
Now, leadership in the military doesn't exactly translate to industry because...
Okay, I want to hear more about this.
Well, only from the vantage point that, you have to obey orders in the military.
There's not a lot of free will, right?
There's a different structure there, which is enabling of leadership. But nonetheless, the skill sets that you're taught are definitely applicable to any situation. And from my experience, being in a leadership role on the civilian side for so long, it's given me the opportunity to take a lot of the leadership training I got from the military, apply it to my civilian job, but then, modify it accordingly to different things that you have to deal with in the civil side. So
it's interesting. I know some folks who actually have recently transitioned out of the military into leadership roles in industry, and they did say the same thing. They're like, well, it's a little bit different in that people don't necessarily just have to do what I say. It's a different style, but I still appreciate, obviously, the military sees value in teaching leadership, and I know that's been a long-standing practice. That's certainly not a new thing either. And so I think it's important to note that if they prioritize it, we should probably be prioritizing it in the civilian world as well.
Well, in the military, for example, the leadership training is based upon the fact that, okay, I'm the leader right now, but if something happens to me, the next person up needs to be the leader.
Okay.
And so everybody's trained all the way down to the last man standing on how to step in and be the leader.
Wow.
And I think that's a powerful methodology. You can't necessarily directly adapt that in a civilian environment because you're not in a firefight or anything like that, not usually. But still, that same principle, I think, is helpful because it helps everybody understand that you are, in effect, leading whatever it is you're responsible for. And at the end of the day, leadership's about, guiding people, empowering people, organizing people to try to accomplish some common purpose. And so the principles are basically the same. And so it's up to you to come up with ways that inspire them to give you the most synergy they can, or
Yes.
to achieve the most synergy they can to achieve that, whatever that purpose is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think about, as I listen to you talk, you've had so many opportunities to lead in so many different capacities. And I would love to get your take on, if you just compare and contrast maybe that first leadership role that you ever had versus where you are now, and maybe some things that have remained true for you always, and maybe some things that you think about differently now, or gosh, I definitely do this in a different perspective than I used to when I was first starting out.
Yeah, I think that, when you're in the military, for example, and you come out and you're a second lieutenant, first lieutenant, or even up to captain, you're going to find that you have, especially in the reserves, quite a diversity of soldiers in terms of age, background, and that, I think, for young leaders is a little bit of a shock, especially if you have a team with some older folks and younger folks, because not only do you have the age difference and the experience difference, but you have the generational differences.
Oh, yes.
And so I think that's probably something a lot of early leaders or new leaders are a little bit shocked by. But once you see that, become familiar with it, then that's one of the things that you figure out that you have to always be vigilant about as you're doing whatever it is you're doing. So I think I'm much more sensitive to that now. I'm much older, and I see the younger generations that we deal with, and a lot of the people we hire are the younger generations. And certainly what motivates them or inspires trust from them can sometimes be different than the older generation. So you have to balance all that.
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. I literally was just having a conversation about that this morning.
Okay.
And just how there's so many different generations in the workplace right now, but just as you think about, each generation is typically raised in a very specific way, and it's not an issue of like, well, this generation is better, or this generation does it right and this generation doesn't. It's just the fact that there are differences, and some of those things, there's some pretty hardwired habits that I know I have personally of how I feel about work, what I think about work, versus other individuals that I'm surrounded by from even the same generation, but definitely different generations from me, that their thought process is very different than mine. And that can create a lot of tension potentially, or conflict in the workplace, if we're not willing to recognize, hey, listen, here's some areas where we might think differently, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but let's talk about that.
Yes.
And acknowledge it.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. I think that's, for example, really applicable to the use of technology.
Yeah.
Because, you have older seasoned engineers, for example, on a team.
Yeah.
And they, of course, understand technology and use technology.
Yeah.
But they usually use it in a way that's far different from the younger engineers or computer scientists that you bring on a team.
For sure.
Because they've been immersed in this.
Yeah.
And it's so natural to them at all levels that they come in with a different style or level of productivity.
Yeah.
And that has to somehow merge with how the more seasoned engineers use technology and how it affects their productivity. And so for today's managers and leaders, they have to be aware of that and understand that. Part of that you mitigate with training. A lot of it you mitigate with just, a team meeting where you talk through process. But that's a big deal, I think, in today's workforce.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting that you say that, because as you think about those different perspectives, just from that technology approach, both groups of people might feel like, I'm justified in the way I do things. That younger group is saying, this is how we were taught. This is the most current version, i.e. the right way to do it. And then you may have more seasoned individuals that say, hey, listen, I've learned through a lot of hard knocks of what really works and what doesn't. I've done this for longer than you have. And again, I think each one's coming to the table with a certain level of expertise. And how you bring those two together can be a challenge. And if you're willing to expand any at all, I love that, of just how maybe you've even facilitated that type of a conversation, because you could get to an impasse in those situations.
Well, the one thing that I want to make sure that I achieve is that the younger engineers and computer scientists learn valuable lessons from the seasoned folks. So I encourage that kind of mentor-protege relationships all the time. The other way around that is I want the more seasoned folks to learn new things, to learn new software development environments or things like that. And so I encourage, for example, what we call brown bag lunch seminars, if you will, where one of the younger folks perhaps will take lunch, everybody will get around the table and they'll talk about this new tool and how to use it, or, this new cloud methodology that no one, and so it's a give and take educational environment that you're trying to encourage. That's because you want to get the maximum productivity, the synergy, and you want the relationships between everybody to feel nurturing and value added.
Yeah, I like that approach, because I feel like instead of positioning it as this way is right and this way is wrong, it sounds to me more like you are driving towards a direction of let's all get better. We all can improve. We can all learn something here. We can all get to a best answer together. And so let's have an opportunity to learn and work together on what that looks like, as opposed to someone wins and someone loses in this conversation in terms of where we go in the future.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's always been important to me for the last couple of decades at least is that, for me, one of the most important management things or management functions or leadership functions that I can perform is expectation management.
Oh, say more about that. I like where you're going.
Okay, so for example, as a leader, it's critically important for me, or any other leader for that matter, to fully understand what it is that you're expected to do. What's the result that you're expected to provide? When are you expected to provide it? How are the results of whatever you're doing going to be measured? And you really have to understand that. You have to be completely synchronized with whoever the stakeholders are.
Yes.
But then as a leader, you have to turn around and communicate that to your team.
Yes.
Or those who are following you.
Yes.
And do it as thoroughly and clearly as you can, and as early as you can.
Yeah.
Now that may change as you go, but you start the baseline. But for me and my personal management style is that I like to establish, and I have always established, a baseline of expectations related to behavior and interaction within the organization. So when someone comes to the foundation to work, the very first thing they get as part of their HR package is a set of CEO expectations.
Oh, I love this. I'm writing this down. Keep going.
HR gives that to everybody.
I love
and it basically says to them that their most important function is expectation management. And it's not expectation necessarily directed toward a specific project. Those are another layer of expectations. Yes. But this is my expectations of that person being an employee of the High Technology Foundation. I don't care what level you are. And these are things like responsiveness. What do I expect from you relative to responsiveness? What do I expect of you in terms of loyalty? What are my expectations of you in terms of how you interact with your coworkers, how you interact with the different functional departments, whether it's HR or whatever. So I try to set those expectations from day one.
I love that.
And I emphasize day one because when somebody comes to an organization, if you're telling them, okay, here's your rules, here's the HR policies and procedures, at the very beginning, that person is taking all of that in as a new employee, but there's really no level of personal internalizing that.
Yes.
And so if I'm setting these expectations at the very beginning about, like I said, responsiveness, behavior, then there's a much better chance that that person's not going to take that personally. As opposed to me telling them this 3 or 4 months in, and then they're like, "Oh, what did I do? What does he mean by that?
What prompted this? Where did this come from?" Yeah.
But if I lay those ground rules from day one, then it's more psychologically a framework that helps guide them.
Yeah.
And so, if that's the basis, then the next layer of expectation management that you give somebody relative to a specific project or task just kind of sits on top of that, and it helps you move along, because you want the team to inspire trust.
Yes.
I mean, that's cliche, but it's
so true.
But it is true, and so you want them to trust that you understand where the organization's going.
Yes.
You have an understanding of basically how we're going to try to get there. And each employee or whoever understands generally what it is they're supposed to do and what their expectations are. And so that's really important, because I don't care how well you plan something, it's never going to go the way you plan.
No.
And that's been my experience, certainly, but I think it's experience of many others. So you have to make sure that when some obstacle comes up, that your team is going to have the faith that we will adapt to it.
Yeah.
We'll overcome it. We don't know how exactly yet, but we're going to adapt to it. We trust that, Jim's leadership, he knows where we're going. He knows basically what we need to do. He'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And so we're going to keep our, shoulders to the grindstone, and we'll keep looking, because they have that basic fundamental trust, as opposed to panicking.
Yes.
And getting distracted and just forgetting about what we're supposed to be doing. So you have to build that. And you also, part of the expectation management too is that, listen, my experiences in talking to a lot of other leaders over the years is that from time to time, for whatever reason, life decides to punch you in the face.
Yes.
I don't know why, but it's kind of a rhythmic thing. And so that's going to happen, and you're going to wipe the blood off, and you're going to keep going. And you're not going to get too upset about it. Just like you're not going to get too over excited when we have a really big success, because this is totally cliche, but it is truly a journey.
Yeah, it really is.
And so you have
to. It's not a straight line or a flat road either.
So you kind of have to set those parameters and manage those. And like I said, my way is to use this expectation management philosophy, both in from a behavioral perspective, and then also from a project management perspective.
Yeah, and I like that you include the behavioral piece. I mean, that's certainly something that I think is missing a lot in organizations, where it tends to be more task and results focused, which is important. But I think sometimes people forget it's the behaviors that allow you to be successful in getting the tasks completed. And sometimes we miss the how. We focus so much on the what that we forget the how, and being clear with people what those expectations and standards are. And when you start at the beginning, and I tell people this all the time when I'm teaching feedback, feedback is so much easier to give if you've set the expectation well from the beginning.
I totally agree with that. 100%.
Right? Because then you can just refer back to, hey, listen, we had a conversation about this. If it's like if you and I were agreed that we were going to go to lunch today at 1 o'clock, and then I just didn't show up to lunch, you could be like, Laura, we had this whole conversation about the fact that we were going to meet at 1 o'clock. It was very clear, what happened, what's going on, versus not even getting to an agreement or being clear about what we were doing in the first place. And that makes it so much harder to refer back to that.
Yeah, and it takes the internalization, the personal feelings out of it a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Which always complicates.
Why doesn't Jim like me? Why is Jim so hard on me?
Well, yeah, it's not me. It's just that's Jim.
Yeah.
So
he's like that with everyone.
I mean, I try to empower everybody. I try to figure out what's the thing that this particular employee can bring the most to the team, and how can I put them in a place that they can be successful. If I put you in a place that you're not being successful, then my objective is to figure out, okay, where do I need to put this person so they can be successful?
Yes.
And so if you do that in a constructive way, then the person usually responds much better to that than, these are your expectations, you didn't meet them.
Yes.
Here's your correction plan. And it just goes much smoother if that person, and again, this goes back to the trust element. If the person, the team member, trusts that you are trying to help them be successful, if they feel that, then it's going to be a lot better.
Well, yeah, because it's coming. I mean, you mentioned I'm trying to position them to be as successful as they can be. I want to look at where they add the most value and then set them up for that success. And that's a very different message to people, especially when you're providing more corrective or constructive feedback, to say, it's because I see potential in you, or it's because I know what you're capable of, or it's because I want you to be successful that I'm sharing this, versus I told you to do X, you did Y, and now you're going to be punished for that. It just feels a lot different.
Yeah, I try to, when we bring new folks in, to say to them, look, I've recognized some skill sets in you that I think is going to help us achieve what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And I think those skills are going to be really valuable for our team. So I want to bring you into the team, try to find the place where those skills are going to have the biggest impact, have the most synergy.
Yeah.
So that we can achieve that, and we'll work together to do that. So that kind of sets the, sets the expectation, sets the ground for what we're moving forward.
Yeah, that all conversations from here on out related to this are coming with that context, or coming from that perspective, which I think is important. There's two things I'd like to dive a little bit deeper on that stood out to me. The first one is that I heard you say loyalty, which I think we're at a different time right now in the workplace as it relates to loyalty. So I'd love to just hear how you define that within your expectations of what loyalty looks like, or what your expectations are around that. And then we can talk about the second one.
Yeah. So I'm a big believer that you get the most out of someone who has a little bit of a passion for what you're doing. And so when we hire somebody, I try to get a feel for whether this is something that whatever it is we're hiring them for, this is something that they're really interested in, they're excited about, and that it's not just them trying to find a job, trying to pass the time. It's somebody that says, okay, this is interesting, this is exciting, and my time is very valuable, so I'm going to commit that to helping achieve this, and I'm going to be loyal to that because it is important to me. I don't want, if someone is just looking for a job, which in many cases that's you have that. Yeah. But some folks, you run across from time to time that you can just tell I'll do whatever, just give me my paycheck, and I'm sure there are places for folks like that. It's usually not our organization. Yeah. But I want them to feel a loyalty to what they're doing, and loyalty also means that if you find that you're not necessarily liking it, or you're losing that passion for it, then you're going to be honest about that and say, hey, can I find a different function here? Or I'm going to, I'm losing my enthusiasm, so I'm going to find another job somewhere. And you know what? I totally support that. No hard feelings. Yeah. But I want you to be loyal enough to the organization to be honest about that.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm so glad I asked, because that is good. That is good. And I think the reason I asked that in particular is that I have noticed just a shift in how loyalty is viewed, both from an employee perspective and an employer perspective. I always think about my dad. My dad, by trade, was an engineer, and he worked for the same company for 42 years. And that was typical for his generation. And I have always been so curious about just that time, because I didn't grow up in his era. And I said, Dad, what did you expect from the company? And he said, I expected them to give me a second chance if I made a mistake, and I expected loyalty from them. And in return, I was loyal back. And where I think, just because of the nature of business nowadays, there's certainly a lot more layoffs than there used to be, and the competitiveness has increased, that it's impacted loyalty. And then now even more so, you have a lot more, even the most recent research that's coming out is showing more and more employees think of themselves more as gig workers, and not necessarily, hey, this is where I want to spend forever. And neither one of us are saying you have to do that, but I do think it's impacting that relationship a little bit more than it used to. It used to be a little bit more of like a reciprocal. We're aligned here on what we're looking for, and now it feels a little different sometimes.
I totally agree with that, and I think that has just been multiplied by orders of magnitude since 2000.
I think so too.
And I think the mainstream adoption of remote work has also accelerated that.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I think the days of, like with your dad working someplace for 40 years, getting the pension, it just doesn't apply. In part because I think society is so much more mobile.
For sure.
I think that technology has also made, filling a job more mobile.
Yeah.
And so it's a different world.
It is.
And also, as I said earlier, the workforce of today have been so immersed in technology in one form or the other for their entire lives that it's, they feel like, sitting in a room behind a desk is just not even the profile of a worker anymore.
Yeah.
It's, you could be walking down the street having a coffee at Starbucks and working, and so so it's totally redefined it. And I think in the case of the knowledge sector, is what I refer to ours, it's kind of been that way for a long time, quite honestly.
For sure.
And I think that you have to redefine what it is to be loyal in both directions.
Yeah.
And I think loyalty requires a lot of honesty and expectation management.
Yes.
Because, I try to be very clear in what it is that, when I hire somebody, why I've hired that person, what I'm trying to achieve, and I want that person to be honest about how they feel about that. What are their circumstances? Because I would not be adverse to hiring somebody that could only do work for a year or something.
Yeah, if you knew that up front, it would be helpful.
If we've managed expectations between ourselves and we're honest with each other, then we both trust each other, we're loyal to each other. And we try to accommodate both ways.
Yeah.
And I think that relationship is what defines certainly an employer-employee relationship of today, but it also defines what a leader has to think about when they're leading a team of whatever it is.
I agree with you. And I appreciate you diving in with that one a little bit more, because I loved how you framed, number one, we're looking for people who are truly passionate about what they do and what we do, and we're clear about that. And I think that's a good message, because I know a lot of people right now who are looking for jobs, and I think that's an important message to think about as someone who's maybe changing careers or looking for something different than where they are right now. Don't just do a check the box kind of exercise, or I just want a job. Really think about, what are you most passionate about? Because that's where you're probably going to add the most value anyway. If you're using the strengths and the gifts that you have to the best of your abilities, and there's an alignment there with, hey, these are the things that I love to do that I'm good at, and oh, by the way, I can do all of those things over here. You're going to have much more success than it's like, I just need anything. I used to work in HR, so I did a lot of job interviews along the course of my career. And I so often I would ask the very basic question of, why do you want to work here? What's causing you to leave your job and want to come here? And so many times people would say, well, I just want to get my foot in the door. I just want to work at this company. And that's great if you're excited about the organization. But to me, I was always looking for a little bit more than just, I just want to get my foot in the door, because it's like, why? What is that underlying motivation for wanting to just be here?
And a lot of times when you hire somebody like right out of college, it's my expectation is that they are probably still finding their way, trying to understand what is it that really excites me. So I don't, I try to be very flexible when we bring somebody in like that that's new. I also have this conversation with our managers and even HR to say, okay, guys, we know this person is sharp. They have all the skills that we like. We're going to bring them on this team. They're going to do this, and we're going to see how that goes. Just like, when you have somebody on probation for 90
because you don't know.
Part of that probation, which may extend, 6 months, is we're trying to observe how they're feeling their way out on that team.
Yeah.
And we may say, you know what, after a few months, it's pretty clear this person's probably stronger here.
Sure.
So can we switch things around so that we can get a maximum output from that person, because they still have skills that are important. So it is kind of a standard process for us to think in those terms for somebody. We try to help nurture them and empower them to focus in after 6 months and get someplace where they're going to be successful. But I think you have to do that as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to be honest, because sure, there's going to be people that say, I don't really know what I want to do yet, but this looks really interesting and exciting to me, and here's why. And you're still able to assess at some level whether they're passionate or not, and at least if they're being honest about it. You're right, you have that alignment of expectations from the beginning, and I just think that is so critical. The other piece that I wanted to talk to you about was when you said inspiring trust. I would love to hear any tactical details that you can give around how do you inspire trust, because I do think that's it's the foundation of all relationships. So it's cannot be underestimated, but it is sometimes. So I would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, and there's no silver bullet, obviously, but and of course the most powerful way to inspire trust is just having worked with the team long enough to where they're like, I know I can trust him. I know he'll be there. Yeah. That's the most powerful way to do it, is just behave and do the things that are going to have your folks, just inspire trust by being trustworthy.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think for me, and again, going back to what I said earlier, for me, it's that putting in place that expectation framework of making sure everybody understands, the circumstances, the expectations, and having that basic framework both from a behavioral standpoint and a project management standpoint. I think that's the best way to begin that journey of creating trust. And as a leader, being conscious of the fact that that's something you need to do.
Yes.
And so as you go along, kind of always checking yourself. And, expectation management is not always the leader to the follower. It's the leader to the leader.
Yes.
And, what are my expectations of myself? Am I meeting my own expectations? Am I meeting these expectations? And if you have a particular teammate that has a particular issue, trouble, whatever, really trying to take the time to understand what's happening and try to fix it. So at the end of the day, and again, it's an oversimplification, but be trustworthy every day in what you do, that's the best way to inspire trust.
Yeah. And there's so much, I think, consistency and stability in acting that way. If people know what they can expect from you, that to me is so huge. And when you share clear expectations, you are establishing that from day one of here's what I expect. Nobody likes to play games with a toddler because they change the rules in the middle of the game, right? And you're like, well, no, that's not how this game is played. And you get in an argument about it, and there's hurt feelings, and the game's over. So I think it's the same way in the workplace a lot of times. If you're clear up front and you remain consistent, and when you say this is the expectation, and then you enforce the expectation, or you reward when someone is performing the way they're supposed to, then they start to know what to expect from someone. And I think it is in that consistency versus, I'm sure you've worked with volatile people that you're just like, I don't know, from one day or another, I can't predict how they're going to act or how they're going to respond to this situation. And that makes people very uncomfortable, and they can't perform at their best levels if they're constantly trying to manage the behavior of their leader or the personality of their leader of like, I can't tell them this because they might fly off the handle. It's not a trustworthy relationship at all.
Yeah, you will never reach full synergy that way, and you really put in jeopardy whether you're going to achieve your objectives. You might get through there, you might muddle through, but you've just created a lot harder work for yourself.
Yeah. Amazing. Now, I know you spend your world every day is in technology, and you've done a lot of really impressive things to raise the level of technology, especially here in West Virginia, which historically in many cases has been more industrially focused, which is not a bad thing, but just, recognizing again, the way of the world, moving from an industrial age to the knowledge worker and beyond. And I know you've done a lot of good work in that respect and are continuing to, and I'd love to hear maybe even a little bit about what's on the horizon. So getting back to our existential, potential crisis, maybe, I don't know, but what do you see as on the horizon for you and your team, and anywhere really you want to go with that question? I'm open.
Well, first let me talk a little bit about what the motivation is. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but one of the biggest issues facing the state for decades has been our lack of economic diversification. We just kind of put all of our eggs in one basket, which is not good. Because that creates incredible volatility economically. But it goes a lot deeper than that, because, if you look at the history of the state, we've had so many, if you look at families in this state, there's been an epidemic of families being broken apart. Because if a particular family has 2 or 3 kids, chances are 1 or 2 of them is going to leave the state because they don't want to work in the coal industry or timber or whatever.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily because they want to leave. They just feel they don't have the opportunity to stay.
Well, there's just no job. But more importantly, there's no career path.
Yes.
So there's a big difference between just getting a job and being able to pursue a career.
Ooh, that is big.
And this state has just not done a good job in that. But it's created a problem that I think goes way deeper. And that is that this lack of economic diversification has prevented us as a state from participating in the growth of the national economy for at least 60, 70 years. And it's prevented us because by being economically undiversified in a particular area that the workforce component of that industry didn't require higher educational attainment above high school, it's left West Virginia at 50th place in educational attainment for 60 years. Now, if you look at the national economy, where has the growth been? It's been in the knowledge sector. And what is the most important resource for the knowledge sector? An educated workforce. So by definition, we've been last place. And so everybody's like, well, wow, coal severance taxes are great. We got natural gas. Why are we still 50th in everything? my personal opinion is it all goes back to the imbalance in the workforce, specifically educational attainment. So, how do you solve that problem? Do you put a call out to educated people to come to the state, or do you...
Yeah, but they might say, for what? What do you have?
That's the problem. It's a chicken and an egg problem. To build, to attract more knowledge sector industry, you need the right workforce demographic.
Yeah.
To get the right workforce demographic, you need industry. So we've been in a hole for...
Catch-22.
It's a huge catch-22.
Yeah.
So you have to come up with a different strategy that doesn't rely on the workforce component, but is powerful enough to overcome it.
Yeah.
And part of our strategy at the High Tech Foundation, and really in the region for the last 30 years, has been to try to leverage the federal operations that we have in the region, like the FBI CGIS, the NETL, and so forth.
Yes.
But also try to recruit more.
Nice.
And the reason that that's a good strategy is because these federal operations that we have in the community, they put out tens of millions of dollars in contracting opportunities every year. And those contracting opportunities are STEM oriented. So that creates a reason or a business case for the kind of knowledge sector companies that we desperately need to want to come here.
Yeah, because you have to build the pipeline for that.
Well, they want the work, they want the money. So they come here to position to bid on it.
Yeah.
Now, in many cases, they'll do half the work here and half the work someplace else because of the workforce problem. But nonetheless, the contracts are here. So that represents a good way to grow the knowledge sector in the state, eventually overcome the workforce demographic problem. If you can build the density of these contracting opportunities big enough to reach that tipping point.
Yeah.
And so that's the strategy that we're following. And
that's great.
One of the best successes we've had over the last 15 years or so has been the recruitment of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA.
NOAA. A lot easier to say.
No. This is the agency that has the National Weather Service, that does fisheries work, really just a number of incredible things. But they're also the lead agency in climate change adaptation and helping the world become more resilient to climate change. And so they have been making billions and billions of dollars of investments in trying to do all that, really forever, but especially in the last 15 years. And so 15 years ago, when we learned that NOAA was going to do this huge ramp up, we immediately focused on them and said, hey, we got to try to recruit them here to be another federal operation doing lots of contracting. And so one of the first things we did was go after a new supercomputing center that they were going to build.
Okay.
Because what good is collecting tons of data if you can't
process it? Yeah.
So we put a team together and was able to convince NOAA to bring their supercomputing center to Fairmont back in 2010. It's called the Environmental Security Computing Center.
Very cool.
And most people don't know this, but it's one of the most advanced supercomputing centers in the country.
Right here in West Virginia.
Right here in West Virginia.
Not 50th on that one.
No, we're top couple.
It's amazing. Amazing.
But I'm really excited because NOAA is spending $100 million this year to basically quadruple that center, which is going to propel us right up there with the likes of Oak Ridge and others.
That's great.
And so I'm really excited about that. But from a knowledge sector perspective, the support contract for that operation, which is currently held by General Dynamics, was $550 million.
Wow.
So you have a contract of that magnitude coming out of Fairmont, West Virginia. It gets the attention.
For sure.
And it's rebid every so often. So companies want to come and back and forth to maybe go after it. But in addition to the supercomputing center, we've had a lot more success with them. We were able to go after and capture the new ground station operation for a satellite program called GOES-R. And I'll leave it to your listeners to Google that.
I know. I was going to say, there's a lot of homework assignments from this. Go check these things out because it's really cool. And a lot of people probably drive by this stuff every day,
no idea.
myself included, and don't really know what's going on there, but know there's good work being done.
And so this is a satellite program that collects most of the climate and weather data for this hemisphere of the planet.
Wow.
The government has spent trillions of dollars on this program.
Wow.
We also were able to capture the ground station for another program that NOAA has called the Joint Polar Satellite System. And these are a whole bunch of satellites that orbit the Earth pole to pole. Again, the government has spent trillions on that. Most recently, we were able to capture a ground station for their new space weather program, which I'm really excited about.
That's awesome.
Because this is a whole new area.
Space weather.
It is crazy.
I can't even wrap my head around that, but I know that's a thing.
But anybody who's driven by the park, if you've noticed that new antenna closest to the interstate we just built, that's what that is. That's a space weather antenna. And
wild.
They'll be launching a bunch of satellites in space. The first one's going to sit in a position called the Lagrange 1, which is right between the Earth and the Sun.
Oh, my goodness.
There's 4 Lagrange points, and all satellites will be in those positions.
Wow.
And so between the combination of those satellite programs and the supercomputing center, there's no other place in the world that collects and has the computational capacity associated with climate and weather, which, ironically enough, makes this probably the leading location in the world for coming up with solutions to climate change adaptation.
Wow.
And resilience, which I say ironic because we're in the heart of coal country.
Right. I was going to say not many people might believe that about West Virginia.
NOAA, in addition to the $100 million for the supercomputing center, NOAA's putting another $200 million over the next couple of years on infrastructure.
Wow.
And so it just
That's
continues
a long-term
to
commitment.
Grow. Oh, no. Yeah. They're going to be here for at least 30, 40 years.
Wow.
And we also, by the way, NOAA, we didn't even have to push them too hard, but NOAA relocated their entire cybersecurity headquarters from Washington to Fairmont.
Wow.
So now we have one of the biggest cybersecurity operations in the nation in Fairmont. Bunch of jobs associated with that.
Unbelievable.
And so it really has brought just an enormous number of contracting opportunities to the community. It's really contributed to the density of that business case we're trying to build.
Yeah.
But one of the things, and you asked me what was exciting, one of the things that's most exciting to me, and I didn't even realize this until about 8 years ago, but there is a commercial climate and weather industry around, companies that start up to provide resources to airports or cities or whatever. And it's $7.5 billion today.
So there's this whole industry out there that many of us don't know about.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow.
But and the seed corn, if you will, the coal seam of that industry is the data we collect in Fairmont.
Oh my goodness.
So we're hoping that more of that industry migrates this way, but I'm really excited because NOAA has launched an initiative to partner with the major cloud service providers like Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud.
Yeah.
To make their data more accessible through cloud platforms and less expensive to work with. Well, there is a reality associated with that when you have that much data, it's really hard to access it remotely from just anywhere.
Yeah.
It's a big data problem.
Yeah.
Which requires that these cloud providers, if they really want to be in this game, are going to really probably need to be co-located with the data source. So it's very likely that we will see at least one or two of these major cloud providers migrate to our community in the next couple of years.
Amazing.
To take advantage of this, because the Commerce Department has come out and said, if we're able to put this in place, this market will most likely triple.
Jeez.
So you can do the math.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
Oh, yeah.
So one of our goals at the High Tech Foundation is to figure out how to make sure that if this comes to fruition, that our community is the epicenter of this multi-billion-dollar expansion.
That's amazing.
So we're working really hard to try to position that.
Yeah.
But in terms of like workforce, for example,
yeah.
It's going to, you could potentially see an exponential explosion in the demand for data science, data analytics, computer science. And so I'm
cybersecurity still.
Yeah, that'll be a component of it.
Yeah.
As well as cloud technologies. So I'm really hopeful that that comes to fruition.
That's amazing. My mind is blown right now. But I love hearing there's a flywheel effect, it seems like, that happened where you just walked us through, this is how you build it. And it didn't happen overnight, but we got one thing that led to another, and now you're starting to really move faster and faster, and there's so many opportunities that are out there. I love how passionate you are. It is very clear. I mean, you practice what you preach, and this has been such an awesome conversation because your passion really comes through, and it's clear that you've sustained that passion throughout your career, and you're still so excited about what's to come, and there's so many great things to come. So I just want to thank you for being here and sharing your leadership story with us and how you lead this group of people. I mean, if I had to invest in you, I would definitely have a lot of confidence in you based on what you've shared with us today and where you're going. So I think nothing but success is coming your way for the foundation under your leadership, which is exciting.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Okay, can we do the lightning round real quick here?
Absolutely.
Speaking of clouds and climates, and that's about all I understand of it is lightning. Okay, this is 60 seconds to answer open-ended questions about you. Here we go. What season best fits your personality?
Fall.
Okay. What's your most used emoji in text?
Laughing out loud.
Okay. What book, song, movie, or podcast has had the greatest impact on your life?
Your podcast.
Oh, gold star. That's great. What's something about you that surprises people when they first hear it?
That's a great question. Surprises.
Do you have like a hidden talent that you want to share?
You know, I don't know that I do. Honestly, I don't know.
Maybe that you were in the Army. I feel like that's not always apparent about you.
Yeah.
Fill in the blank. I spend too much money on...
books.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing. That's money well spent. What celebrity would you want to play you in a movie?
Oh, goodness.
This one stumps people a lot.
God, I have no idea. Robin Williams.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. Oh, this has been great, Jim. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm excited to see where things go next for you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Until next time, shine bright, everyone.